The laboratory hummed with quiet activity as Lee Hanna bent over her workstation. Her small hands moved carefully across the glass surface, adjusting the microscope settings to examine another alien specimen. The xenobiology lab aboard the Coalition. Starship Harmony's Edge was her domain, filled with samples from 12 different worlds and species that made up the Galactic Coalition. Hanna was 28 years old and barely reached 5 feet in height. Her black hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and her dark eyes focused intently on her work. She wore the standard blue uniform of the Coalition Science Division, though it seemed to hang loose on her small frame. To most of the alien crew members aboard the ship, she looked fragile and insignificant. The ship was massive, stretching over 2 miles in length, and housing representatives from all 12 Coalition species. They were traveling to Kepler 442b for the most important diplomatic mission in Coalition history. The hostile Drakari Empire had finally agreed to peace talks, and every species had sent their best diplomats and warriors. Well, almost every species. Hanna could hear voices from the corridor outside her lab. The walls were thick, but alien voices carried differently than human ones. She recognized the deep, rumbling tones of the Vorthak warriors and the clicking sounds of the Quileth diplomats. Why did they bring the humans anyway? The voice belonged to Korthak, one of the Vorthak soldiers. His species stood 12 feet tall and weighed as much as small vehicles. Their thick, scaled skin could stop most projectile weapons, and their strength was legendary throughout the galaxy. "Protocol," replied another Vorthak voice. "All Coalition species must be represented, even the weak ones." Hanna's hands paused over her instruments. She had heard this conversation many times before, in different languages and from different species. Always the same theme. Humans were weak. "Look at them," continued Korthak. "Their skin tears if you touch it too hard. They live for barely a century. They cannot survive in most atmospheric conditions without artificial support. What use are they in serious negotiations?" A new voice joined the conversation. This one belonged to Quileth Ambassador Vorthis, whose insectoid species was known for their diplomatic skills. "They have certain technological advantages," the ambassador clicked. "Their computers and communication systems are quite advanced for such a primitive species." "Primitive," Korthak laughed, a sound like rocks grinding together. "Yes, that describes them perfectly. I watched their security chief yesterday. Park Jin-woo, I think his name was. He was trying to demonstrate human combat techniques to our warriors. My youngest offspring could have defeated him without effort." Hanna sighed and returned to her work. She had grown used to these comments during the 5 years since humanity joined the Coalition. Every species seemed to have an opinion about human weakness. The Vorthak focused on physical frailty. The Quileth dismissed human diplomatic abilities. The crystalline Nexari considered human lifespans too short to matter. The gas-based Etherians thought humans were barely conscious compared to their own advanced minds. The specimens before her told a different story, though. Hanna had spent years studying the biology of every Coalition species. She knew their strengths, but she also knew their weaknesses. The mighty Vorthak could lift incredible weights, but their massive bodies required enormous amounts of food and rest. The brilliant Quileth could process information at amazing speeds, but their exoskeletons were brittle, and their lifespans were tied to complex molting cycles. The Nexari could live for thousands of years, but they were vulnerable to certain sound frequencies that could shatter their crystalline forms. Every species had evolved to survive in their specific environments. Humans had evolved on a world that tried to kill them in 1,000 different ways. Earth had predators, diseases, natural disasters, extreme weather, and terrain that ranged from frozen wastelands to burning deserts. Humanity had survived by being adaptable, persistent, and above all, by working together. But none of the other species seemed to understand this. The humans brought only 20 personnel. Korthak's voice continued from the corridor. 20. The Vorthak delegation alone numbers 200 warriors. What can 20 soft-skinned weaklings accomplish? They will observe and stay out of the way, replied Vorthus. That is probably for the best. The Drakari Empire would laugh at any species that sent such fragile representatives to peace negotiations. Hana's jaw tightened. She had read the reports about the Drakari Empire. They were aggressive, militaristic, and respected only strength. The coalition had been at war with them for over 50 years, losing more battles than they won. This peace summit was perhaps the last chance to end the conflict before it consumed entire star systems. The laboratory door chimed and Park Jinwoo entered. He was the head of human security for the mission, a stocky man with broad shoulders and calm eyes. Even so, he looked small compared to the alien crew members. At 5 feet 8 inches, he was actually tall for a human, but the shortest adult. Vorthak stood nearly 12 feet high. How are the preparations going? Jinwoo asked, settling into a chair that was designed for much larger beings. Almost finished, Hana replied, not looking up from her microscope. I have biological profiles, completed for all 12 coalition species and preliminary data on Drakari physiology based on captured samples. Good. The captain wants all department heads to review security protocols before we reach Kepler 442b. Jinwoo paused, listening to the voices in the corridor. I take it our alien friends are sharing their opinions about humanity again? They think we are useless, Hana said simply. Weak, primitive, fragile. They cannot understand why we were included in this mission. Jinwoo was quiet for a moment. Maybe they have a point. Look at us, Hana. You weigh maybe 50 kilograms. I am considered strong for a human. But any Vorthak child could overpower me. Our skin bruises from impacts that other species would not even notice. We need environmental suits to survive in most alien atmospheres. Hana finally looked up from her work. And yet, here we are, traveling between stars, negotiating with species that have had spaceflight for thousands of years longer than we have. There must be something they are missing. What do you mean? I have been studying their biologies for 5 years, Hana explained. Every species in the coalition is physically superior to humans in some way. The Vorthak are stronger. The Quilith are smarter. The Nexari live longer. The Etherians exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously, but they all have critical weaknesses too, such as the Vorthak are so large that they cannot move quickly or for long distances without exhausting themselves. The Quilith are brilliant, but their exoskeletons make them vulnerable to physical damage. The Nexari are nearly immortal, but they shatter easily. Every species has evolved to be excellent at one thing, but that makes them weak at everything else. Jinwoo leaned forward. And humans? Humans evolved to be mediocre at everything, Hana said with a small smile. We are not the strongest, fastest, smartest, or longest lived, but we are decent at all of those things. More importantly, we are adaptable. We can survive in environments that would kill most other species. We can learn new skills quickly. And when faced with impossible situations, we find ways to endure. The voices in the corridor grew louder. More species had joined the conversation about human inadequacy. Hana could hear the musical tones of the Etherians and the harmonic resonance of a Nexari captain. They will learn, Hana said quietly, returning to her specimens. Eventually, they will all learn what humans are truly capable of. Jinwoo studied his friend's determined expression. You sound very confident about that. I am a scientist, Hana replied. I believe in evidence. And the evidence shows that humans have survived everything their universe has thrown at them. We have colonized worlds, built technologies, and formed alliances with species that are physically superior to us in every measurable way. That does not happen through weakness. The ship's intercom crackled to life. All personnel to stations. We will reach Kepler 442b in 6 hours. Department heads report to the bridge for final briefings. Jinwoo stood up. Time to go face more. Comments about human fragility. Hana saved her work and began securing the laboratory equipment. Let them talk. Words do not change reality, and reality is that humans are here, participating in the most important diplomatic mission in coalition history. There must be a reason for that, even if they cannot see it yet. As they left the laboratory together, the alien voices in the corridor fell silent. Hana and Jinwoo walked past groups of towering Vorthak warriors, elegant Quilith diplomats, and shimmering Nixari officers. Every alien eye followed the two small humans, and Hana could feel their mixture of curiosity and contempt. She had grown accustomed to being underestimated. Soon, she thought, that might change. The diplomatic compound on Kepler 442b stretched across several square kilometers of carefully maintained ground. The massive biodomed facility had been built specifically for this peace summit, with different atmospheric zones to accommodate all the attending species. Through the transparent dome overhead, 3 moons hung in the purple sky of the neutral world. Lee Hana stood at the observation deck of the human quarters, watching delegations from dozens of worlds gather in the central plaza. The sight was magnificent. Towering Vorthak warriors moved in formation, their scaled skin gleaming under the artificial sunlight. Graceful Quilith diplomats floated on their anti-gravity platforms, their insectoid forms clicking and chirping as they communicated. Crystalline. Nixari representatives stood like living sculptures, their bodies refracting light into rainbow patterns. The human delegation occupied the smallest section of the compound. 20 people in simple blue uniforms, looking tiny among the hundreds of alien representatives. Even their quarters were modest compared to the massive structures built for larger species. Day 2 of negotiations, Park Jinwoo said, joining Hana at the window. How do you think we are doing? The aliens are still treating us like observers, Hana replied. They speak around us, not to us. The Drakari delegation has not even acknowledged our presence. Through the dome, she could see the Drakari representatives in their own section. They were a militaristic species, standing 7 feet tall with thick armor plating covering their bodies. Their leader, General Vorthak, had refused all attempts at direct communication with the smaller coalition species. Maybe that is for the best, said Kim Soman, the communications officer, as she entered the observation area. I have been monitoring Drakari transmissions. They seem angry about something. When are they not angry? Jinwoo asked. The Drakari respect only strength. They probably see this entire summit as a waste of time. Choi Do-hyun, the medical officer, looked up from his datapad. I have finished analyzing the biological samples from all attending species. Interesting patterns in stress hormones across the delegations. What kind of patterns? Hana asked. Everyone is nervous. Even the Vorthak warriors are showing elevated stress markers. The Quilith diplomats are molting ahead of schedule, which only happens under extreme pressure. Something has everyone on edge. Before anyone could respond, alarms began blaring throughout the compound. The pleasant lighting shifted to harsh, red emergency illumination. Automated voices in 12 different languages announced the same message. All personnel to secure positions. Unknown vessels detected in orbital approach. Through the dome, Hana could see streaks of light descending. From the sky, ships, many ships. Their design was unmistakably Drakari, but these were not diplomatic vessels. These were warships, bristling with weapons and moving in attack formation. They are not here to talk, Jinwoo said grimly, reaching for his communication device. All human personnel, implement Emergency Protocol 7. Secure positions and prepare for hostile contact. The first explosions came without warning. Drakari dropships landed throughout the compound, disgorging armed soldiers who immediately opened fire on anything that moved. The peaceful plaza became a battlefield in seconds. Hana watched in horror as the mighty Vorthak warriors, despite their size and strength, fell under concentrated plasma fire. Their thick scales, which could stop most conventional weapons, offered little protection against military-grade Drakari weaponry. Warriors who had seemed invincible just moments before collapsed, their massive bodies smoking from energy burns. The Quileth diplomats tried to flee on their floating platforms, but the vehicles were slow and offered no protection. Plasma bolts shattered their delicate exoskeletons, sending the insectoid beings tumbling to the ground. Their brilliant minds, capable of processing information at incredible speeds, could not calculate fast enough to avoid the chaos of battle. The crystalline. Nexari fared even worse. The sonic weapons carried by Drakari soldiers produced frequencies that caused the living crystal beings to crack and shatter. Beings who had lived for thousands of years fell apart in seconds, their ancient wisdom scattered like broken glass. Across the plaza. "This is not a battle," Hana said, her voice barely audible over the sounds of destruction. "This is a massacre." "Move," Jinwoo ordered. "We need to reach the medical bay. There will be wounded." The human team moved quickly through, the corridors staying low and avoiding the main passages where fighting was heaviest. Their small size, which had been seen as a disadvantage, now helped them move unseen through spaces too cramped for larger beings. The medical bay was in chaos when they arrived. Wounded aliens of every species lay on tables, floors, and any available surface. The automated medical systems were overwhelmed, trying to treat injuries from dozens of different physiologies simultaneously. Choi Do-hyun immediately went to work, his medical training taking over. "Hana, I need you to identify species-specific treatments. My equipment is designed for human medicine, but your xenobiology knowledge might help us adapt it." Hana moved between the wounded, her scientific mind cataloging injuries and biological responses. A Vorthak warrior lay unconscious, his massive chest rising and falling slowly. Plasma burns covered his torso, but his thick scales had absorbed most of the damage. He would live, but he could not move. Several Quileth diplomats huddled. In a corner, their cracked exoskeletons leaking bodily fluids. Their compound eyes looked dull with pain and shock. Hana knew their biology well enough to understand that once their exoskeletons were damaged, they became incredibly vulnerable. "The compound is falling," Kim Soman reported, monitoring communication channels. Drakari forces are moving systematically through each section. They are not taking prisoners. "How long do we have?" Jinwoo asked, while helping move wounded aliens to more secure positions. "Maybe an hour before they reach this section. The emergency bunkers beneath the medical facility might offer protection, but we would need to move everyone." Hana looked around at the wounded. Most were too injured to move themselves, and many were too large for the surviving able-bodied aliens to carry. The Vorthak warrior alone weighed over 800 pounds. The other species, weakened by their own injuries, lacked the strength to help. "We cannot leave them," she said quietly. "We may have to," Jinwoo replied. "We cannot carry everyone, and staying here means death for all of us." Another explosion shook the medical bay. Dust fell from the ceiling, and several pieces of equipment toppled over. The Drakari forces were getting closer. "There!" Choi Do-hyun pointed to a wall display showing the compound's layout. "Emergency bunkers 3 levels down, medical facilities, food stores, and communication equipment. If we can reach them, we might be able to call for help." "The route goes through collapsed sections," Kim Soman observed, studying the display. "Narrow passages, emergency ladders, unstable debris. It would be difficult for healthy individuals, impossible for the wounded." Hana studied the display more carefully. The path to safety wound through damaged sections of the compound, requiring climbs, crawls, and careful navigation around collapsed walls. Any injured person would need to be carried the entire distance. We need to make choices, Jinwoo said reluctantly. Save who we can, leave the rest. It is harsh, but it is reality. The Quilleth diplomats clicked weakly in agreement. The few conscious. Nexari resonated with sounds that indicated acceptance. In their cultures, the wounded who could not keep up were left behind during retreats. It was a practical necessity of survival. But Hana continued staring at the massive form of the unconscious. Vorthak warrior, Vorthak Prime, the leader who had called humans weak just days before. His breathing was steady, but his lower body was paralyzed from the plasma burns. Without medical treatment, he would die within hours. We should decide quickly, Choi Do-hyun urged. I can stabilize the most critical patients, but we need to move soon. Another explosion, closer this time. The lights flickered, and emergency power kicked in. Through the walls, they could hear the sounds of approaching Drakari soldiers. Heavy footsteps, electronic communication, and the distinctive whine of charging plasma weapons. Hana knelt beside the injured Vorthak leader. His massive head was the size of her entire torso. His arm alone was thicker than her waist. Logic said he was impossible to move, that attempting to save him would doom them all. But as she looked at his unconscious face, she remembered his words from the ship. What use are they in serious negotiations? He had called humans weak, primitive, useless. Maybe it was time to show him what humans could really do. Start moving the others who can be moved, she said, standing up. I will figure out how to get Vorthak Prime to the bunkers. Hana, that is impossible, Jinwoo protested. He weighs 800 pounds. The path requires climbing and crawling through tight spaces. Even if we had a full team of humans, we could not carry him that distance. Then I will have to find another way, she replied, already examining the emergency supplies scattered around the medical bay. The other aliens looked at her with expressions ranging from confusion to pity. The small human woman, barely 1/6, the weight of the being she intended to save, was planning to attempt the impossible. But Hana was already working, her scientific mind calculating angles, leverage, and mechanical advantages. She gathered cables, support struts, and medical equipment, beginning to construct something that looked like a makeshift stretcher. The Drakari will be here in 30 minutes, Kim So-min warned. Then I better hurry, Hana replied, testing the strength of her improvised rescue device. The wounded aliens watched in silence as the tiny human began the impossible task of preparing to move their largest and strongest warrior. None of them believed she could succeed. Most of them thought she was about to die in a pointless gesture. They were about to learn something important about humanity. The emergency bunker was cramped and filled with the sounds of pain. Emergency lighting cast harsh shadows on the walls as the survivors huddled together, listening to the battle raging above them. The massive blast doors had sealed them in, but everyone knew it was only a temporary safety. Hana knelt beside her improvised stretcher, testing the cables and support frames she had constructed from medical equipment and emergency supplies. The device looked fragile compared to the enormous bulk of Vorthak Prime, who lay unconscious on the floor nearby. The medical bay is 3 levels down through damaged sections, Park Jinwoo said, studying the bunker's emergency maps. The route includes 2 collapsed corridors, a destroyed stairwell, and at least 4 emergency ladder climbs. I know, Hana replied, adjusting the pulley system she had rigged to one end of the stretcher. I have studied the schematics. Kim So-min looked up from her communication equipment. Drakari forces have breached the medical level. They will find this bunker soon. We need to move now. The other survivors watched Hana's preparations with growing unease. Several wounded Quilleth diplomats clicked nervously among themselves. Their translator indicated they were discussing the impossibility of the task ahead. In our culture, said Quilleth Ambassador Vorthis, his voice weak from pain, the wounded who cannot move are left behind. It is practical. It ensures the survival of the group. A Nexari captain, her crystalline form cracked but still functional, resonated with agreement. The individual must be sacrificed for the many. This is logical. Choi Do-hyun finished checking Vorthak Prime's vital signs. He is stable for now, but his condition will deteriorate without proper medical support. If he does not reach the medical bay within 6 hours, he will die. Then we have 6 hours, Hana said simply. You have 6 hours to attempt the impossible, corrected the Nexari captain. This being weighs 800 pounds. The path requires climbing, crawling, and navigating through spaces barely wide enough for normal-sized individuals. Even if you were 10 times stronger, you could not succeed. Hana stood up and faced the assembled aliens. Her small frame looked even tinier in the cramped bunker, surrounded by beings that towered over her even when wounded. You are probably right. By any logical calculation, I should not be able to move Vorthak Prime to safety, but I am going to try anyway. Why? Asked Ambassador Vorthus. Why risk your life for someone who called your species weak and useless? Because he is hurt and needs help, Hana replied. That is enough. Jinwoo moved closer to his friend. Hana, I know you want to help, but this is not possible. The distance alone would exhaust you, and that is without carrying 800 pounds of dead weight. Not dead weight, Hana corrected. Vorthak Prime is still alive. That means there is still hope. She activated her communication device and contacted the other human team members who had been helping evacuate less injured aliens. Kim Salmon, I need you to start moving the walking wounded toward the medical bay. Take the route through Section 7. It should still be clear. What about you? Soman asked. I will take the direct route with Vorthak Prime. The direct route is completely blocked, Soman protested. The structural damage reports show collapsed walls, debris fields, and unstable sections. No one has attempted to go that way. Then no one will expect us to use it, Hana replied. Start moving. I will meet you at the medical bay. She turned back to the unconscious Vorthak leader. His breathing was shallow but steady. Burns covered much of his torso, and his lower body showed no response to stimulation. Without advanced medical treatment, the neural damage would become permanent. You called humans weak, she said quietly to the unconscious warrior. Maybe you were right about our bodies, but you do not understand our minds. Hana began the process of transferring Vorthak Prime onto her makeshift stretcher. The task required careful positioning and leverage, using every principle of physics she could remember. The alien survivors watched in fascination as the tiny human used cables, pulleys, and mechanical advantage to slowly move the massive warrior. Remarkable, whispered the Nexari captain. She is using primitive tools to amplify her limited strength. It is still not enough. Ambassador Vorthus clicked. The initial movement is the easiest part. Maintaining that effort over hours of travel through difficult terrain is impossible for any individual. But Hana was not listening to their doubts. She secured Vorthak Prime to the stretcher and tested the mobility of her creation. The wheels salvaged from medical equipment rolled smoothly on flat surfaces, but she knew most of her journey would not be on flat surfaces. Choi Do-hyun, she called to the medical officer. Give me whatever stimulants and pain medication you can spare. I will need both. Hana, taking stimulants for extended physical exertion is dangerous. Your heart could fail under the strain. My heart will definitely fail if I do not try, she replied. His chances of survival drop every minute we delay. Do-hyun reluctantly prepared a medical kit with emergency supplies. This should help with pain and fatigue, but use them carefully. Too much will kill you, and too little will kill him, Hana said, accepting the supplies. The bunker's sensors detected movement in the corridors above. The Drakari forces were getting closer, systematically searching every room and passage. Soon they would find the emergency bunker. Everyone else needs to leave now, Hana announced. Take the evacuation route and get to safety. Do not wait for me. We should stay and help, Jinwoo insisted. No, I will move faster alone, and if I fail, there is no reason for everyone to die with me. Hana checked her equipment one final time. Besides, someone needs to be alive to remember what happened here. The alien survivors began filing out through the secondary exit, heading toward the longer but safer evacuation route. Each one paused to look back at the small human woman preparing to attempt the impossible. "Why?" Ambassador Vorthis asked one final time. "Your species gains nothing by saving him. He has shown you no kindness, no respect. Why risk everything?" Hana considered the question as she made final adjustments to her stretcher. "Because that is what humans do. We carry each other. Even when it seems impossible, even when it makes no logical sense, we do not leave people behind." The ambassador's compound eyes reflected something that might have been understanding. "Perhaps we have misjudged your species. You judged us by the wrong things," Hana replied. "You looked at our bodies and saw weakness. You should have looked at our hearts." The bunker fell silent except for the steady breathing of the unconscious Vorthak. Prime and the distant sounds of destruction above. Hana stood alone with her impossible burden, a 5-foot-tall woman preparing to carry an 800-pound warrior through 3 levels of damaged structure. She activated the emergency release on the bunker's main door. The passage beyond was dark, filled with debris and twisted metal. The path to the medical bay stretched ahead like a maze designed to kill anyone foolish enough to enter. "Time to show them what humans can really do," she said to herself, and began pulling the stretcher into the darkness. The first corridor was a nightmare of twisted metal and fallen debris. Emergency lighting flickered sporadically, casting dancing shadows that made every obstacle look like a trap. Hana pulled the stretcher carefully around chunks of concrete and bent support beams, her small frame working steadily in the darkness. Vorthak Prime remained unconscious, his massive body secured to the improvised stretcher with medical cables and emergency straps. The wheels that Hana had salvaged from medical equipment rolled smoothly when the path was clear, but most of the route required her to lift, drag, and maneuver the stretcher over obstacles. Behind her, following at a safe distance, came the other, survivors. Despite her orders to take the evacuation route, they had chosen to witness her attempt. Park Jinwoo led the group, staying close enough to help if needed, but far enough back to avoid interfering with her work. "She has been moving for 30 minutes, whispered Kim Solman, watching Hana navigate around a collapsed wall section. "The stretcher weighs almost as much as she does, even without Vorthak Prime on it." "Look at her technique," observed Choi. Do-hyun. "She is not trying to overpower the obstacles. She is using leverage, angles, and momentum to move around them." The alien survivors watched in growing amazement as the tiny human continued her methodical progress. When the stretcher's wheels could not roll over debris, she used cables and pulleys to create lifting systems. When passages became too narrow, she partially dismantled obstacles with tools salvaged from emergency kits. "This is not possible," clicked Ambassador Vorthis weakly. "No individual of any species should be able to maintain this level of exertion. Where is her strength coming from?" "It is not strength," said the Nexari captain, her crystalline form resonating with something like awe. "It is something else. Something we do not understand." Ahead, Hana reached the first major obstacle. A section of ceiling had collapsed, blocking the corridor with a wall of concrete and metal that reached nearly to the ceiling. A gap near the top might be wide enough for the stretcher, but it was 8 feet off the ground. The alien witnesses expected her to turn back, to admit defeat and find another route. Instead, Hana began constructing a ramp system using debris and support cables. Working with methodical precision, she built an inclined plane that would allow her to pull the stretcher up and through the gap. "Ingenious," whispered Jinwoo. "She is turning the obstacle into part of the solution." The construction took over an hour. Hana worked without stopping, her hands bleeding from cuts and scrapes, but never slowing down. When the ramp was complete, she began the arduous process of pulling 800 pounds of warrior up a steep incline through a gap barely wide enough for the stretcher. Halfway up, the improvised wheels broke. The weight was too much for the salvaged medical equipment. Without hesitation, Hana switched to a dragging technique, using her entire body as a counterweight to move the stretcher inch by inch toward the gap. She should have given up by now, observed the Nexari captain. Any logical being would recognize the futility of this effort. Humans are not always logical, Jinwoo replied quietly. Sometimes that is our weakness. Sometimes it is our greatest strength. Vorthak Prime stirred briefly as the stretcher reached the gap. His massive eyes opened for a moment, focusing on the small human who was pulling him to safety. Leave me, he whispered, his voice barely audible. Save yourself. No, Hana replied simply, not even pausing in her work. We do not leave people behind. Why? The warrior asked. I called your species weak. I showed you no respect. Why do this for me? Because you are hurt and I can help, Hana answered, securing new cables to replace the broken wheels. That is enough reason. Vorthak Prime's eyes closed again, but the alien witnesses had heard the exchange. Something in the human's simple response affected them deeply. This was not about honor, or duty, or political advantage. This was about something much more fundamental. The second level presented new challenges. The emergency stairwell had been destroyed, leaving only a shaft with exposed emergency ladders. Hana studied the situation for several minutes, then began rigging a pulley system that would allow her to lower the stretcher one level at a time. This will take hours, said Kim Somin, checking her chronometer. The medical window is closing. Then I better work faster, Hana replied, testing the strength of her cable system. What followed was the most difficult part of the journey. Hana had to descend the ladder while controlling the stretcher's descent with pulleys and counterweights. Her small hands, already cut and bleeding, gripped the cables with desperate strength as she managed 800 pounds of dead weight on a makeshift elevator system. Twice the cables slipped, and only Hana's quick reflexes prevented the stretcher from crashing to the bottom of the shaft. Each time she resecured the system and continued, her breathing becoming labored, but her determination never wavering. Why does she not ask for help? Wondered Ambassador Vorthis. We could assist with this. She knows we are here, Jinwoo replied. But she also knows that if we help and something goes wrong, we will all die together. She is protecting us by doing this alone. Protecting us? The Quilith ambassador's compound eyes reflected confusion. We are larger, stronger, more experienced in survival situations. How is the smallest among us protecting the rest? By being willing to fail alone rather than drag others down with her, explained Choi Do-hyun. It is a human trait. We take responsibility for impossible tasks so others do not have to. The descent took 3 hours. When Hana finally reached the bottom of the shaft, her arms were shaking with exhaustion and her uniform was soaked with sweat and blood. But Vorthak Prime was still alive, still breathing steadily on his improvised stretcher. The final corridor stretched ahead, leading to the medical bay. This passage had suffered the least damage, but it was also the longest single stretch of the journey. 800 meters of straight corridor that would require pure endurance to complete. Hana checked Vorthak Prime's vital signs using Choi Do-hyun's medical scanner. His condition was stable but deteriorating. She had perhaps 2 hours before his injuries became critical. Almost there, she said to the unconscious warrior, as much to encourage herself as to comfort him. The alien witnesses followed in complete silence now. They had stopped offering advice, stopped questioning her methods, stopped calculating the impossibility of her task. They simply watched as the tiny human began the final phase of her journey, pulling her impossible burden toward salvation. Her pace had slowed significantly. Each step required visible effort, and she stopped frequently to rest and adjust her grip on the stretcher cables. But she never stopped moving forward. Step by step, meter by meter, she continued toward the medical bay. I have never seen anything like this. The Nexari captain resonated softly. In 3,000 years of life, I have never witnessed such persistence. None of us have, replied Ambassador Vorthis. We are observing something that our species do not possess, something uniquely human. What is it? Asked Kim Salmon, genuinely curious. The refusal to accept impossible, said Jin Woo. The ability to continue when logic says to quit. The willingness to attempt what cannot be done simply because it needs to be done. Ahead, the medical bay doors came into view. Hana had been moving for over 6 hours, pulling 800 pounds of warrior through 3 levels of destroyed structure. By every calculation, she should have collapsed hours ago. Her small frame should never have been able to maintain such effort for such a duration. But as the doors grew closer, her pace actually increased. The end was in sight, and somehow that knowledge gave her new strength. The alien witnesses watched, in silent awe as the impossible became reality before their eyes. The medical bay doors slid open with a soft hiss, revealing banks of advanced medical equipment and treatment stations designed for multiple species. Lee Hana pulled the stretcher through the entrance and immediately collapsed to her knees, her small frame finally succumbing to 8 hours of impossible exertion. Medical emergency, Choi Do-hyun called out, rushing to activate the automated treatment systems. Vorthak physiology, massive trauma, neural damage to lower extremities. The medical bay's artificial intelligence responded immediately, extending treatment arms and scanning devices toward the unconscious warrior. Within seconds, Vorthak Prime was surrounded by humming machines that began the delicate process of treating his injuries. Hana remained on her knees beside the stretcher, her hands still gripping the cables she had used to pull him to safety. Her uniform was torn and blood-stained, her face streaked with sweat and dirt, but her eyes remained focused on the medical readouts showing Vorthak Prime's vital signs. Treatment initiated, announced the medical AI. Patient condition stable. Neural pathway regeneration possible with continued care. Estimated recovery time, 6 to 8 weeks. Only then did Hana allow herself to sit back, her mission finally complete. Park Jin-woo moved quickly to her side, checking her condition while Kim So-min activated the medical bay's communication systems to call for evacuation support. The alien survivors gathered around the stretcher in complete silence. They stared at the small human woman who had accomplished the impossible, their expressions ranging from shock to something approaching reverence. Ambassador Vorthis was the first to speak, his voice barely above a whisper. How did you do this? By every calculation, every measure of physical capability, this task was impossible for a being of your size and strength. Hana looked up at the towering Quylith diplomat, her dark eyes exhausted but calm. I did not think about whether it was impossible. I only thought about what needed to be done. But the physical demands, protested the Nexari captain, her crystalline form resonating with confusion. You carried 800 pounds of mass through 3 levels of destroyed structure. Your species lacks the muscle density, the skeletal strength, the cardiovascular capacity for such exertion. You are right, Hana agreed. Humans are not built for tasks like this. We are smaller, weaker, more fragile than most species. But we evolved on a world that tried to kill us every day. We learned to survive not through individual strength, but through persistence. Choi Do-hyun finished his examination of Hana's condition. Severe dehydration, muscle strain, multiple lacerations, and complete exhaustion, but nothing that will not heal with rest and treatment. How? Ambassador Vorthis asked again. What biological mechanism allowed you to exceed your apparent limitations so dramatically? Jin-woo answered for his exhausted friend. Persistence hunting. It is how early humans survived on Earth. We could not outrun our prey, could not overpower it, could not outsmart it in direct confrontation. But we could outlast it. We could keep moving when everything else stopped. But that is a hunting technique, the Nexari captain observed. What does that have to do with this situation? Everything, Hana said quietly. Persistence hunting is not just about catching prey, it is about refusing to give up when logic says the task is impossible. It is about continuing to move forward no matter how much it hurts, no matter how tired you become, no matter how far the goal seems. She gestured toward the medical equipment surrounding Vorthak Prime. I did not carry him because I was strong. Enough. I carried him because stopping was not an option. The unconscious Vorthak warrior stirred, his massive eyes opening slowly as the medical treatments began to take effect. He focused on Hana with visible confusion, as if trying to process what had happened. You, he said, his voice weak but clear. The small human. You brought me here. Yes, Hana replied simply. I called your species weak. I said you were useless, primitive, fragile. Vorthak Prime's eyes reflected something that might have been shame. I was wrong. You were not entirely wrong, Hana said. Humans are fragile. Our bodies break easily, we live short lives, and we lack the natural advantages that other species possess. But you made one mistake in your assessment. What mistake? You assumed that physical weakness equals total weakness. You looked at our bodies and decided that was all we were. Hana slowly stood up, her legs shaking with exhaustion but her voice growing stronger. But humans are not just bodies. We are minds and hearts, and something else that you do not have words for. What is that something else? Asked Ambassador. Vorthis. The refusal to abandon each other, Jinwu explained. The inability to walk away from someone who needs help, even when helping them might destroy us. Other species calculate survival odds and make logical decisions. Humans calculate differently. How do you calculate? The Nexari captain asked. We do not, Hana said. When someone needs help, we help. When someone is hurt, we heal them. When someone is lost, we carry them home. We do not ask whether it is possible or logical or beneficial. We ask only whether it is right. Vorthak Prime struggled to sit up, the medical equipment adjusting to accommodate his movement. His massive frame, which had seemed so powerful before, now looked vulnerable, surrounded by alien technology. I have been a warrior for 40 years, he said slowly. I have fought in countless battles, led armies, conquered worlds. I thought I understood strength. He looked directly at Hana. I have never seen anything as strong as what you did today. I am not strong, Hana protested. I am tired, hurt, and barely able to stand. Any of you could break me without effort. No, Vorthak, Prime said firmly. You are the strongest being I have ever encountered, and I was a fool not to see it before. The medical bay fell silent except for the humming of life support systems and the distant sounds of rescue operations beginning throughout the compound. The alien survivors processed what they had witnessed, trying to reconcile their understanding of strength and capability with the impossible feat they had just observed. We need to reconsider everything, Ambassador Vorthis said finally. Our entire assessment of human capabilities, human value, human potential. We have been measuring the wrong things. What should we have been measuring? Asked Kim Soman. Not what humans can lift, but what they can endure, the Quilith diplomat replied. Not how fast they can run, but how far they will go. Not how strong their bodies are, but how unbreakable their spirits are. The Nexari captain's crystalline form resonated with a new harmonic frequency, one that indicated deep contemplation. In 3,000 years of existence, I have learned to quantify almost everything. Mass, energy, time, probability. But this, human trait you speak of, this persistence, this refusal to abandon others, it cannot be measured by our instruments. Because it is not a physical trait, Choi Do-hyun observed. It is something else entirely, something that exists in the space between logic and action. Vorthak Prime slowly extended his massive hand toward Hana. She looked at it for a moment, then reached out and placed her small hand in his palm. The contrast was striking, her delicate fingers dwarfed by his armored digits. Yet somehow she seemed to be the one offering strength rather than receiving it. "I owe you my life," the warrior said. "But more than that, I owe you an apology. I judged your species by your appearance and found you wanting. I failed to see what truly mattered." "What truly matters?" Hana asked. "That when everyone else was ready to leave me behind, you refused to abandon me. That when logic said I was not worth saving, you decided logic was wrong." Vorthak Prime's voice grew stronger. "That is not weakness. That is the greatest strength in the universe." Rescue alarms began sounding throughout the compound as coalition ships arrived to evacuate the survivors, but none of the beings in the medical bay moved toward the exit. They remained frozen in the moment, processing a fundamental shift in their understanding of what it meant to be strong. They had seen weakness in human form and dismissed an entire species as insignificant. Now they understood they had been looking at strength itself and failed to recognize it. 3 days later, aboard the coalition rescue ship Unity's Promise, the survivors of the Kepler 442b attack gathered in the main assembly hall. Representatives from 12 species filled the vast chamber, but the atmosphere was different from any previous coalition meeting. The usual segregation by species had given way to mixed groups, with aliens sitting beside humans in a way that would have been unthinkable just a week before. Hana sat in the front row, her small frame still, bearing the marks of her ordeal. Bandages covered her hands and arms where cables had cut into her skin during the rescue. Despite protests from medical staff, she had insisted on attending the assembly. At the center of the chamber, Vorthak Prime stood at a specially designed podium, his massive form supported by medical braces but his voice strong and clear. The warrior who had once dismissed humans as weak now commanded the attention of every being present. "Fellow members of the coalition," he began, his deep voice carrying easily through the chamber. "We have gathered to discuss the events on Kepler 442b and their implications for our alliance. But before we address military matters or diplomatic consequences, we must acknowledge a more fundamental issue." The assembly waited in respectful silence. Word of Hana's impossible rescue had spread throughout the rescue fleet, growing in the telling but losing none of its essential truth. The small human who had carried a warrior through hell had become something of a legend among species who rarely agreed on anything. "For 5 years, we have treated humanity as the junior member of our coalition," Vorthak Prime continued. "We have assigned them observer status, limited their participation in military operations, and generally dismissed their contributions as minimal. We have done this because we judge them by the wrong criteria." Park Jin-woo shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Even now, being the center of galactic attention felt strange to the small human delegation. They remained outnumbered by thousands to one in the coalition fleet. "We measured human value by physical strength, longevity, and individual capability," the Vorthak leader said. "By these measures, humans appeared to be the weakest species in our alliance. We were not wrong in our measurements. We were wrong in what we chose to measure." Ambassador Vorthus rose from his section of the assembly. "The Quileth delegation wishes to formally apologize to our human colleagues. Our assessment of your species was incomplete and led to significant undervaluation of your contributions to our alliance." Similar statements came from representatives of other species. The crystalline Nexari spoke of reconsidering their understanding of strength after 3,000 years of existence. The gaseous Etherians admitted that their multi-dimensional consciousness had somehow missed the most important dimension of human nature. "Words are appreciated," said Captain Kim Soman, speaking for the human delegation. "But we are more interested in actions. What changes will the coalition make based on this new understanding?" Vorthak Prime gestured to a display screen that showed the current coalition military structure. "Effective immediately, human personnel will be integrated into all coalition operations at full participation levels. No more observer status, no more limitations based on perceived physical inadequacy." Additionally, added Ambassador Vorthis, the Coalition Science Council requests that human researchers take leading roles in developing new approaches to problem solving. Your species' unique perspective on persistence and endurance may provide solutions that have eluded us for centuries. The changes represented a fundamental shift in the balance of galactic power. Humanity would go from junior member to equal partner in the space of a single assembly vote. But the most significant change was harder to quantify. Choi Do-yun noticed it first during his medical duties. Alien crew members who had previously avoided the human sections of the ship now sought out human medical staff, not because of superior technology, but because of something different in the approach to care. Human medics, it seemed, simply refused to give up on patients that other species would consider hopeless cases. The phenomenon spread beyond medical care. In engineering sections, human technicians found solutions to problems that had stumped larger, supposedly more intelligent species for months, not through superior knowledge or equipment, but through the simple refusal to accept that a problem was unsolvable. "They are calling us something new," reported Kim Soman during a human delegation meeting a week into the journey home. "Not the weak species, not the junior members. They have a new term." "What term?" asked Jinwoo. "The carriers." Hana looked up from her scientific reports. "Carriers? Not because we carry heavy objects," Solman explained. "Because we carry other people. We carry responsibility. We carry hope when others have given up. They see it as our defining characteristic." The new designation spread throughout the coalition fleet with remarkable speed. Within days, humans were being consulted on problems far beyond their apparent expertise. Species that had dismissed human opinions for years now sought their input on everything from military strategy to philosophical questions. "It is remarkable," observed the Nexari captain during a joint staff meeting. "Human solutions often appear inefficient or illogical at first examination, but they possess a quality that our approaches lack." "What quality?" asked Hana. "They account for factors that we do not measure: hope, persistence, the refusal to abandon effort even when logic suggests failure is certain. These elements change the entire calculation." The conversation was interrupted by an emergency communication from Coalition Command. The message was brief but significant. The Drakari Empire had requested immediate resumption of peace negotiations, citing respect for coalition resilience demonstrated during the Kepler 442b incident. "They want to negotiate again?" Jinwoo asked, in surprise. "More than that," replied Admiral Chen from Coalition Command. "They specifically requested human participation in the negotiations. They said they want to understand the species that refuses to leave wounded enemies behind." The assembly erupted in discussion as species representatives debated the implications. But Hana remained quiet, processing the deeper meaning of the Drakari response. "They are not just interested in negotiating," she said finally. "They are interested in learning from us. The attack on Kepler 442b was meant to demonstrate their strength and our weakness. Instead, it demonstrated something they had never seen before." "What did it demonstrate?" asked Vorthak Prime. "That's strength without. Mercy is not really strength at all. That power without compassion is just destruction. They saw me carry you to safety and realized they had been measuring strength incorrectly, too. The implications were staggering. The Drakari Empire had based their entire military philosophy on overwhelming force and the abandonment of the weak. Seeing a human risk everything to save an enemy challenged their fundamental assumptions about power and survival. 3 months later, the peace negotiations resumed on a neutral space station near the galactic core. The coalition delegation was led jointly by Vorthak Prime and Lihana, representing the new understanding of strength that had emerged from the ashes of Kepler 442b. The Drakari delegation arrived expecting to negotiate with the traditional coalition leadership. Instead, they found themselves face to face with a 5-foot-tall human woman who had become the symbol of something they had never encountered before. "You are the carrier," said General Vorthak, the Drakari leader, when he first met Hana. "The one who would not abandon her enemy." "I am the one who does not see enemies," Hana replied. "I see beings who need help." The negotiations that followed were unlike any in galactic history. Instead of focusing solely on territorial boundaries and military advantages, the discussions explored concepts of mutual aid, shared responsibility, and the strength that comes from refusing to abandon others. The final peace treaty included provisions that revolutionized interstellar relations. Military conflicts would now include mandatory medical aid for all wounded, regardless of species or allegiance. Abandonment of prisoners or injured combatants became a war crime punishable by the entire galactic community. But perhaps the most significant change was cultural. Throughout the galaxy, the term carrier became synonymous not with human weakness, but with the highest ideal of strength. Other species began studying human persistence techniques, trying to understand how such a small and fragile people had found the strength to change the fundamental nature of galactic civilization. Hana returned to her laboratory aboard the Harmony's Edge, but her work had new meaning now. She was not just cataloging alien biologies, she was building bridges between species who finally understood that true strength came not from individual power, but from the refusal to let others fall. The galaxy had learned that when you see weakness, in human form, you are looking at the wrong thing entirely. You are seeing the body, not the spirit. And the human spirit, they now knew, was unbreakable. In the end, they had seen weakness in her form and watched in silence as she carried the wounded monster alone. But in that silence, they had discovered something far more valuable than physical strength. They had discovered what it truly meant to be strong.